In this video, I'm going to teach you all about user stories. All right, so what is a user story? Well, first of all, where is, I guess you'd say. Now, when you think about it, the product backlog that we created and we talked about, it is full of user stories. All right, so these individual lines that you see here, each one of those is a user story. And what it basically does in common people language, it's a statement of what is needed, individual features that are needed for the product that will produce value. And as we see at the top of the backlog, you might assume that that's the most highly ranked user story that's available, and you'd be correct. All right, so these are statements of what is needed. Also, they're framed from the user's perspective. We'll talk all about that, but realize we're putting it in the user's hands to say, this is what I'd like, and this is the value that I'll get from it, okay? And what it does, these things up there, the user stories, they are written, they're conceptualized in order to drive understanding and discussion about what the user wants and what we have to do to get there, all right? So there is a follow-on to these user stories that adds depth and understanding, and that's part of the genius of them, okay? Now, these are predominantly from the Agile world. However, they can be used in Waterfall to conceptualize what requirements they need to have for the project. But this is mostly an Agile type characteristic. But as we go through it, you'll see that you could potentially apply these in your world in Waterfall. So here we go. Now, user stories, from a high level, I want you to think about them as bridging the gap between the people who want something, the customer, the product owner, and the people who build something that they want, right? So there are two different camps here. We have to bridge the gaps. The user stories are what help bridge those gaps. All right, so there was a very, very smart guy, still is, named Ron Jeffries. He is the founder of Extreme Programming, amongst other things, kind of an Agile luminary, genius guy. And he came up with user story 3 C's, the 3 C's of user stories. These are really awesome. All right, so the first thing is, we're gonna go through them, 3 C's, the card. Now, user stories are on an index card. I wish I had one in front of me. Like just a paper index card. That's what they're there for. Now, you might think like, we're doing computer stuff or projects, we need fancy. No, start with a physical card. There's a reason for it, all right? So they are annotated with the user story, some kind of notes, estimates, but think about a card. What can you do with a card? Well, first of all, you could rip it up if it's no good. You can hold it, you can pass it around, you can work through it. It's something that you can put on a table and group together. It has a certain like impermanence, but like openness to it that allows it to be pitched around, all right? So super important that the first C of the user story is a card. That's where we write it down. Now, the other thing is conversation. Now, the card is a promise or an introduction or a guarantee that when we get ready to think about this card, we're going to have a conversation about it. Because think about it, index cards are about that big. You can't put that much stuff on it. You have to follow up with, what do you mean? Can you explain this? Would this be correct? All those kind of things to get clarification. So the details for the actual user story, the nitty-gritties, come out via discussion with the product owner, namely with the team members and the product owner talking about it, okay? And this is where we're gonna get a deeper understanding, all right? And this is super duper important. The other thing is, if you think about the product backlog having tons of cards in it, we're not gonna go at the same depth right off the bat to all of them. That would take a lot of time, right? So we're gonna say the ones that are ranked to the top, we're gonna get those and we're gonna see, whoa, what do you mean by this? How would this work? What are the risks? What is it connected to? Let's make an estimate off that. But we're gonna spend our time on the things that are at the top and refine those, okay? So the first thing is card, second thing is conversation, number 3 is confirmation. Now the confirmation comes through the discussion with the product owner when we start to understand, well, what are the acceptance criteria for this? How will we know what done is, what it looks like, okay? And this is the expectations for done from the product owner. And really what we're doing is setting ourselves up to be like, have a good conversation in the product review or demo on the back end of the sprint or iteration to say, we put these into the sprint, they went through, the team, went through, managed, figured out how they, accomplish it. They get to the end and they say, like, this is what we went off. These are the done. And that's like the script for going through the demo. All right. So the 3 C's, card, conversation, confirmation. That's what we're doing here. All right. So what is the structure of the actual user story? Let me ask. All right, so let's pretend it's COVID time, unfortunately. And imagine we work for a big doctor's office or something like that, and we had a new program, a new project that we were going to put out there. It's basically that we want to say we are COVID aligned. We are going to minimize your impact of COVID. We have everything streamlined. It's our whole COVID safety program. We can still see the doctor, all those things, right? That sounds great. That'd be a great way to serve the customers and drum up some extra business to say, this doctor really cares about me. Not bad. So that's the thing that we're working on right now. Imagine that you're the product owner, okay? Now, we have to start developing cards for individual features that would be supported in that, okay? So maybe one of the things that if we got around the room and started thinking about what could we do? What could we do? What would they value? They'd say, well, maybe this would work. Like as a patient, thinking about them, I would want to be notified remotely when my doctor's ready to see me, so that I can lower my COVID risk by spending less time in the office. Basically, I'll just sit in the car. Hey, you ready? Ding, let's go in. And be like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, that seems like a good feature to have. Cool. And then the other one somebody else might say, as a patient, I want to be able to update my insurance info online so that I'm not held up in the office filling out paperwork, using this pin that somebody else touched, all this stuff. So those could be two, and you could be like, oh, wow, these are really awesome. Keep them coming, y'all. Keep them coming. And we say like, oh, as the doctor, I'd like to be able to do this. Or as the administrator, I'd like to be able to do this. Or as the patient, I'd like to be able to do this. That's what we go through. And think about the backlog would be filling up with all these things that we could do, right? Now, let's look at the deeper into the structure of one of those. We said, what do we say? As a patient. So as a patient, we're framing who it's about. I want to be notified remotely when a doctor's ready to see me. Okay, so that's telling what we're dealing with here. And then lastly, so that I can lower my COVID risk by spending less time in the office. Okay, so there are three things here, right? As we see in the red, I want to be so that I can. Now, what does that frame up to? Who are we talking to? Whose eyes are we looking through? What do they want? And then why does it matter? What's the rationale, the logic behind it? So those three things break up the user story, and there are a step-by-step way to frame up how we conceptualize our requirements in a sense, okay? And they're an arrow toward requirements, all right? So let's follow the structure down more detailedly. As a insert user, as a doctor, as a patient, as an admin, as the tech person in the office, as whatever, I want to be able to, I need to, I should be able to, whatever, and then provide value, whatever the functionality that you want in there. Then lastly, so that I can and have a reason behind it. Now, this is often optional, this last thing, but it's not bad to come through and say, so that I can, give it a little reference to it. Now, into the discussions later between product owner and team, we're going to ask all these like, what do you mean, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to flush it out. But right now, let's get it on there. Boom, move to the next card. Start filling up that backlog. So let's think about how we went about and got it in our little fantasy conversation. How do we build the product backlog and start putting those cards out there? Well, first thing we did is we had the entire team in there. We'd have the couple doctors, we'd have the admin people, the tech people, maybe have a customer or two, who knows, or a representative or something from the customer. And we'd say, all right, what do we think? Let's get the ideas going. Nothing's wrong. Let's just throw them on the board. Let's write these cards, right? We would do these relatively periodically at the front, fill it up. And then as we learn more, shoot, putting more into the pipeline and the backlog. And then lastly, we're always driven by the product goal. What is our goal, product owner? Our goal is to, deliver a service that lowers COVID risk, creates, security and drives, higher flow through of our customers and all those things. What are the product goals that we're going for? That will drive back to what user stories would deliver on them. Makes sense? Now, we want to write as many stories as possible. Keep them going, not for the sake of more, but let's just get the ideas out. Because we're not worried about the ideas filling up the backlog like, oh no, we wrote it down, we got to do it. No, we're going to rank them, right? So that we get the big ones, we'll further refine them, we'll talk about later, and we'll work them through, okay? That's what we're trying to do. So we're not scared that the cards are there. We can just put a rubber band around them and say, we'll get to it. But right now, the top stuff is the top stuff. Now let's talk about the level of detail that we want on the card. Now, at the beginning, when we're out there putting cards out there, writing them down, should we go forward and just take each card and break it down in granular depth, all the details behind it, acceptance criteria, all the specifications, all the drawings, anything that we could put behind it. Should we do that with all the cards? They're there on the product backlog. What do you think? Well, in reality, when they start off, we don't do that. They are brief and focused. We're going to follow the actual technique and the layout that we have here. We're going to put a high-level brief and focused description of what we want as far as the feature goes in value terms. Now, when do we go details? We get details with follow-on questions, all right? And we only do that when needed, right? And when do we need it? When those cards bubble up to the top of the product backlog. So that's when it's judicious to spend our time and our team's time to go through that, ask the questions, refine them down, get them to a point where they have good understanding, we've been estimating them, and we're ready to work them. We can actually work them. And we don't spend our time or waste our time on the things that we might not deliver or we might not do for months or years or ever. So we are going to prioritize the things at the top. We're going to be managing our backlog. That's called backlog refinement. Next video. All right. And so when we go into that, it's a conversation with the team and the product owner that helps refine these to get to that level of understanding. And it's awesome. All right. And so the conversation, like we said, drives understanding from both parties, and it's focused on context and reasoning. Why are we doing this? What value do we get? Like, how would it play out? Like, can you clarify these points? What do you mean by this? Those are the things where we can get quick little loops in that face-to-face conversation between the product owner and the team to help define what the team needs to deliver and how to estimate it and how it ranks estimation-wise versus the other requirements out there, or the user stories, right? And so lastly, it also helps the team understand the acceptance criteria that the product owner defines. And that's super important because through that conversations, we're going to break out that acceptance criteria. This needs to be done at the end. This is what it needs to be done as terms of done. All right. And so now we see that these little simple baby cards, the user stories, are very, very powerful. They are defining what we want to deliver in value of the customer, and it helps rank them, and it helps get a conversation, a currency between us, product owner and team, so that we can drive understanding, awareness, and we can actually set them up to be worked correctly.